Hi guys, we are back for part 2 of chapter 1 of The Great Gatsby. Sorry, it's taken me a couple days. So I just wanted to take a couple minutes to recap kind of what we have already talked about, what I've already read through. I didn't do a really good job explaining some of the things that were on the PowerPoint notes that I provided for you, so I'm just going to go through those real quickly. So in chapter 1, we met our narrator, Nick Carraway. I mentioned to you that he is sort of talking to you, the reader. It's a very informal tone. It's like he's talking to you as a friend. As a reader, I want you to remember that you need to question Nick a little bit as a narrator of what you can believe, not because he's a big liar or not because he seems like unstable, but just because narrators come with certain bias, and Nick certainly has some of those. Nick tells you at the beginning that his father taught him not to judge people, and that because of that, he tries to reserve all judgments. Nick presents himself as a highly moral, highly tolerant character, but he also tells you that he is has a tendency to avoid certain conversations that he doesn't want to hear, even if that means taking lies or making up lies to kind of get out of it. So, again, you can't believe everything that he says. He mentions Gatsby at this point in the chapter, but it's only vaguely. He doesn't really say much. He makes this contradictory statement about how Gatsby represented everything that he hates, and yet he liked Gatsby. He admired him. He said Gatsby had an extraordinary gift for hope, and that's a really important part of the story as he tells it. The story opens up as Nick has arrived or is arriving in 1922 in New York City area to work the bond business. So it's kind of like the stock market sort of thing. He rents a little bitty house in West Egg Village on Long Island, which was a fictional place. It's based on a real location, but it's fictional. And it happens to be right next door to Gatsby's mansion. There are two locations. I talked about this when I previewed the book, and I mentioned it a little bit last time. You have East Egg and West Egg. East Egg is very classy, refined. That's where the old money people live. It's more conservative, aristocratic. These are families who have had money for years, and they don't even really work. It's like their job is to just be rich. West Egg, on the other hand, they are new money. It's more flashy. There's less refined behavior. They tend to they're trying to look like old money people, but they don't really know how. So their stuff tends to be a little bit gaudy. So it's too much. Nick lives in West Egg. He doesn't really fit in as a West Egg person. He isn't truly rich. His family is sort of an upper middle class family, but he does have connections to East Egg with his cousin Daisy. And so he's a little different. He did attend Yale, and that tells us that his family obviously had some money. It wasn't normal then for just everyone to go to college. Nick, in the book, goes to East Egg to have dinner with the Buchanans. Daisy is his cousin. Tom is her husband. Tom and Nick knew each other before because they went to Yale together. They were in the same fraternity group, although they weren't really in the same. They didn't have the same interests. It tells you that Tom was an athlete while Nick was more of a nerd. When he gets there, he finds Daisy with her friend Jordan lounging on a sofa. The movie, if you've seen it, the Leonardo DiCaprio version, the movie does a really good job with this scene. It shows all these billowing white curtains floating around the room, and then when they shut the windows and doors, all the curtains kind of fall down. There's a lot of color symbolism, and we'll talk about some of that as we proceed in the book. So as we see Tom, he's not an especially nice guy. Nick says he feels like Tom is always giving the impression that he thinks he's better than everyone. And he brings up this book called The Rise of the Colored Empires at dinner. No one's especially interested in it. The book is racist. He says that everyone should read it, and everyone just sort of kind of blows it off. Daisy kind of makes fun. She says, "Oh, he's getting very profound. He reads big books with big words," and she kind of teases him a little bit. At dinner, Tom gets a phone call. The phone starts ringing, and that's where we left off. So Tom had gotten a phone call. He left the table. Daisy tries to make some small talk. She says that Nick is like a rose. She just loves to see him at her table. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. Nick doesn't either. He says she's obviously extemporizing, which is kind of like making it up on the fly. And then she just awkwardly like gets up and all of a sudden leaves the table to follow Tom, which leaves Jordan and Nick sitting at the table. Nick, and that's where I'm going to start reading. Nick tries to make small talk, but Jordan's going to shut him down right away because she has something else on her mind. Miss Baker and I exchanged a short glance, consciously devoid of meaning. I was about to speak when she sat up alertly and said, "Shh," in a warning voice. A subdued, impassioned murmur was audible in the room beyond, and Miss Baker leaned forward, unashamed, trying to hear. The murmur trembled on the verge of coherence and sank down, mounted excitedly, and then ceased altogether. "This Mr. Gatsby you spoke of is my neighbor," I said. "Don't talk. I want to hear what happens." "Is something happening?" I inquired innocently. So if you aren't understanding, Jordan is trying to eavesdrop on Daisy and Tom's conversation in the house. She's being nosy, and she's not ashamed of it either. "You mean to say you don't know?" said Miss Baker, honestly surprised. "I thought everybody knew." "I don't." "Why," she said hesitantly, "Tom's got some woman in New York." "Got some woman?" I repeated blankly. Miss Baker nodded. "She might have the decency not to telephone him at dinner time, don't you think?" Almost before I had grasped her meaning, there was the flutter of a dress and the crunch of leather boots, and Tom and Daisy were back at the table. "It couldn't be helped," cried Daisy with tense gaiety. She sat down, glanced searchingly at Miss Baker and then at me, and continued, "I looked outdoors for a minute, and it's very romantic outdoors. There's a bird on the lawn that I think must be a nightingale, come over on the Cunard or White Star Line. He's singing away," her voice sang. "It's romantic, isn't it, Tom?" "Very romantic," he said, and then miserably to me, "If it's light enough after dinner, I want to take you down to the stables." The telephone rang inside, startlingly, and as Daisy shook her head decisively at Tom, the subject of the stables, in fact, all subjects, vanished into air. Among the broken fragments of the last 5 minutes at table, I remember the candles being lit again, pointlessly, and I was conscious of wanting to look squarely at everyone and yet to avoid all eyes. I couldn't guess what Daisy and Tom were thinking, but I doubted even Miss Baker, who seemed to have mastered a certain hearty skepticism, was able utterly to put this fifth guest's shrill, metallic urgency out of mind. To a certain temperament, the situation might have seemed intriguing. My own instinct was to telephone immediately for the police. So what's happening now is they're at dinner. It's really kind of tense. The phone has started ringing again, and they're just letting it ring. No one inside is answering it. Probably they were ordered not to. And so the phone keeps ringing, and everyone's trying to ignore the fact that the phone is ringing. And so it's just this really tense, awkward dinner. The horses, needless to say, were not mentioned again. Tom and Miss Baker, with several feet of twilight between them, strolled back into the library, as if to a vigil beside a perfectly tangible body. While trying to look pleasantly interested, and a little deaf, I followed Daisy around a chain of connecting verandas to the porch in front. In its deep gloom, we sat down side by side on a wicker settee. All right, so again to the notes. Jordan is the one who tells Nick that Tom has a mistress, that he's cheating with a woman in New York. That's all she knows at the time. Now dinner is over, and Jordan and Tom have gone into the house, and Nick and Daisy are like walking around the property. Daisy took her face in her hands, as if feeling its lovely shape, and her eyes moved gradually out into the velvet dusk. I saw that turbulent emotions possessed her, so I asked what I thought would be some sedative questions about her little girl. "We don't know each other very well, Nick," she said suddenly, "even if we are cousins. You didn't come to my wedding." "Well, I wasn't back from the war." "That's true." She hesitated. "Well, I've had a very hard time, Nick, and I'm pretty cynical about everything." Evidently, she had reason to be. I waited, but she didn't say any more, and after a moment I returned rather feebly to the subject of her daughter. "I suppose she talks and eats and everything?" "Oh, yes." She looked at me absently. "Listen, Nick, let me tell you what I said when she was born. Would you like to hear?" "Very much." "It'll show you how I've gotten to feel about things. Well, she was less than an hour old, and Tom was God knows where. I woke up out of the ether with an utterly abandoned feeling, and asked the nurse right away if it was a boy or girl. She told me it was a girl, and so I turned my head away and wept. 'All right,' I said. 'I'm glad it's a girl, and I hope she'll be a fool. That's the best thing a girl can be in this world, a beautiful little fool.' You see, I think everything's terrible anyhow," she went on in a convinced way. "Everybody thinks so, the most advanced people. And I know. I've been everywhere and seen everything and done everything." Her eyes flashed around her in a defiant way, rather like Tom's, and she laughed with thrilling scorn. "Sophisticated. God, I'm sophisticated." Okay, so what I want to point out about Daisy at this point um, is that um, she's very self-centered. So she mentions to Nick, we don't know each other very well. You didn't even come to my wedding. He points out, yeah, well, I didn't come because I was still in the war. And she says, that's true, but still. Everything's about Daisy. She says, let me tell you how things have been going for me. He's trying to talk about her little girl. Most mothers, especially with a first child, would love the opportunity to talk about their kid. Daisy, however, is much more interested in talking about herself. And then she has this statement about finding out that it's a little girl. She says, all right, then I'm glad it's a girl, and I hope she'll be a fool. That's the best thing a girl can be in this world, a beautiful little fool. That statement packs a lot of meaning. The idea here is that if she's pretty but foolish, then maybe she won't be able to pick up on all these injustices that go on around the world. The fact that women aren't treated very well. Again, think about the time period. Women did not have the rights that we think of today at that point in time. So Daisy seems very selfish. She seems unhappy with her life, which she's going to go on. Notice she said that when she had her little girl, Tom was God knows where. She was alone. It wasn't unusual in 1922 for women to give birth without the dad being around. And when it says she woke up from the ether, that was used as like a painkiller or a sedative. So they'd like knock women out under like an ether gas. They don't do that anymore because it's bad for delivery and bad for the baby. The instant her voice broke off, ceasing to compel my attention, my belief, I felt the basic insincerity of what she had said. It made me uneasy, as though the whole evening had been a trick of some sort to exact a contributory emotion from me. I waited, and sure enough, in a moment she looked at me with an absolute smirk on her lovely face, as if she had asserted her membership in a rather distinguished secret society, to which she and Tom belonged. So on top of seeming selfish and unhappy, she also seems really insincere to Nick at this time. Inside, the crimson room bloomed with light. Tom and Miss Baker sat at either end of the long couch, and she read aloud to him from the Saturday Evening Post, the words, murmurous and uninflected, running together in a soothing tune. The lamplight, bright on his boots and dull on the autumn leaf yellow of her hair, glinted along the paper as she turned a page with a flutter of slender muscles in her arms. When we came in, she held us silent for a moment with a lifted hand. To be continued, she said, tossing the magazine on the table. In our very next issue. So it's talking about Jordan Baker. She was reading to Tom. Her body asserted itself with a restless movement of her knee, and she stood up. 10 o'clock, she remarked, apparently finding the time on the ceiling. Time for this good girl to go to bed. Jordan's going to play in the tournament tomorrow, explained Daisy, over at Westchester. Oh, you're Jordan Baker. I knew now why her face was familiar. Its pleasing, contemptuous expression had looked out at me from many rotogravure pictures of the sporting life at Asheville and Hot Springs and Palm Beach. I had heard some story of her, too, a critical, unpleasant story, but what it was I had forgotten long ago. Good night, she said softly. Wake me at 8, won't you? If you'll get up. I will. Good night, Mr. Carraway. See you anon. So Nick realizes now why Jordan looked familiar. She is a professional golfer, which would have been a big deal for women at that time. And he remembers that he read some story about her that wasn't a very pleasant story or not a very positive story. He doesn't remember exactly what the story was, but he knows that it wasn't very good, and he's just forgotten what the details were at this time. That's relevant because it foreshadows some information you're going to get later in the book. Of course you will, confirmed Daisy. In fact, I think I'll arrange a marriage. Come over often, Nick, and I'll sort of, fling you together. You know, lock you up accidentally in linen closets and push you out to sea in a boat and all that sort of thing. Good night, called Miss Baker from the stairs. I haven't heard a word. She's a nice girl, said Tom after a moment. They oughtn't to let her run around the country this way. Who oughtn't to? Inquired Daisy coldly. Her family. Her family is one aunt about 1,000 years old. Besides, Nick's going to look after her, aren't you, Nick? She's going to spend lots of weekends out here this summer. I think the home influence will be very good for her. Daisy and Tom looked at each other for a moment in silence. Is she from New York? I asked quickly. From Louisville. Our white girlhood was passed together there. Our beautiful white... Did you give Nick a little heart-to-heart talk on the veranda? Demanded Tom suddenly. Did I? She looked at me. I can't seem to remember, but I think we talked about the Nordic race. Yes, I'm sure we did. It sort of crept up on us the first thing you know. Don't believe everything you hear, Nick, he advised me. I said lightly that I had heard nothing at all, and a few minutes later I got up to go home. They came to the door with me and stood side by side in the cheerful square of light. As I started my motor, Daisy peremptorily called, Wait! I forgot to ask you something, and it's important. We heard you were engaged to a girl out west. That's right, corroborated Tom kindly. We heard that you were engaged. It's a libel. I'm too poor. But we heard it, insisted Daisy, surprising me by opening up again in a flower-like way. We heard it from 3 people, so it must be true. Of course, I knew what they were referring to, but I wasn't even vaguely engaged. The fact that gossip had published the banns was one of the reasons I had come east. You can't stop going with an old friend on account of rumors, and on the other hand, I had no intention of being rumored into marriage. So, what's going on here at the end of the evening? First of all, Daisy thinks she's being kind of cute and funny when she talks about setting Nick and Jordan up. And Jordan says, I didn't hear anything. She's pretending not to hear it. They're just joking. They're messing around. But then out of nowhere, Tom is looking at them and he asks Daisy, what did you say to Nick out there? Do you guys have a little heart-to-heart? So he seems very suspicious of what Daisy might have shared with Nick. She says, I don't know. I think we must have talked about the Nordic race. She's teasing him about the racist book thing from earlier. Tom makes the comment, don't believe everything you hear, Nick. So Tom seems to have something that he wants to hide. Obviously, Jordan's already mentioned that he's having an affair. So maybe that's it. Maybe there's more to it. But Daisy says she doesn't know what they talked about. Nick says he didn't hear anything. And then they want to know if the rumors are true about him being engaged. He says that's a libel, meaning like that's false. It's not true. He says he's too poor to be engaged. He also says he knows what they're talking about. He says he had been going, you can't stop going with an old friend on account of rumors. And on the other hand, I had no intention of being rumored into marriage. So he obviously had a girlfriend. People kind of started rumors about them maybe getting engaged or maybe getting married. He apparently didn't want to. He also didn't want to break up with her. So he just left town. Real stand-up guy kind of thing to do. But that's what it says. Their interest, meaning Tom and Daisy's, their interest rather touched me and made them less remotely rich. Nevertheless, I was confused and a little disgusted as I drove away. It seemed to me that the thing for Daisy to do was to rush out of that house, child in arms, but apparently there were no such intentions in her head. As for Tom, the fact that he, quote, had some woman in New York was really less surprising than that he had been depressed by a book. Something was making him nibble at the edge of stale ideas, as if his sturdy physical egotism no longer nourished his peremptory heart. So Nick's a little disgusted, even here at the beginning of the book, at Daisy's situation. He's like, it seems like she should just leave. She should take the kid and leave Tom. She's unhappy. He seems like a jerk. He's cheating. So he doesn't understand why she doesn't just do that. And he says Tom's definitely, like, he's on edge for some reason. He doesn't know what's going on with him. Already, it was a deep summer on roadhouse roofs and in front of wayside garages where new red gas pumps sat out in pools of light. And when I reached my estate at West Egg, I ran the car under its shed and sat for a while on an abandoned grass roller in the yard. The wind had blown off, leaving a loud, bright night with wings beating in the trees and a persistent organ sound as the full bellows of the earth blew the frogs full of life. The silhouette of a moving cat wavered across the moonlight, and turning my head to watch it, I saw that I was not alone. 50 feet away, a figure had emerged from the shadow of my neighbor's mansion and was standing with his hands in his pockets, regarding the silver pepper of the stars. Something in his leisurely movements and the secure position of his feet upon the lawn suggested that it was Mr. Gatsby himself come out to determine what share was his of our local heavens. Okay, so on the notes, I've already mentioned that Jordan is in a golf tournament the next day. Tom and Daisy both seem to want Nick to date Jordan. Nick has now made it home, and he is sitting outside his house, and he notices he's not alone. It says that 50 feet away there was another guy. He's pretty sure it's Gatsby himself. And so that's what's going on here. He sees Gatsby. I decided to call to him. Miss Baker had mentioned him at dinner, and that would do for an introduction. But I didn't call to him, for he gave a sudden intimation that he was content to be alone. He stretched out his arms toward the dark water in a curious way, and far as I was from him, I could have sworn he was trembling. Involuntarily, I glanced seaward and distinguished nothing except a single green light, minute and far away, that might have been the end of a dock. When I looked once more for Gatsby, he had vanished, and I was alone again in the unquiet darkness. So he sees Gatsby out there at the edge of the water. He's reaching his arms forward. Nick says it looks like he's trembling. He's reaching towards apparently nothing. The only thing Nick sees is a green light, which becomes a symbol in the book. He says this green light might have been at the end of a dock. Like, it's just a light out there in the water. And then when he looks back to where Gatsby was, he's gone. The guy's just basically vanished. So everything about Gatsby in chapter 1 is pretty mysterious. In chapter 2, you are going to get to meet a couple more characters. We're going to see some more about Tom. So I hope that these 2 videos have helped you get a good understanding, a good start of the book, and that you will find them useful because they took quite a bit of time to put together. So can't wait to do another one for you guys. Bye.